The gavel strikes like thunder against marble, and the echo hangs heavy in the air. 100 whispers vanish into silence. Every face in the courtroom turns toward Jasmine Crockett, composed, deliberate, her gaze steady as if time itself had slowed to measure her restraint. Across the bench, Chief Justice John Roberts watches with that unreadable calm that only years of authority can forge. Yet even he cannot hide the faint crease of surprise edging his brow. Moments ago, a challenge had been hurled across the room. Sharp, dismissive, meant to rattle her. It was the kind of provocation that draws headlines, the kind that decides reputations. But Crockett doesn't flinch. She breathes once, the kind of quiet breath that carries both defiance and discipline. The audience senses it. Something is about to shift. The power dynamic, the tone, the very temperature of the room. Cameras wait for an outburst. None comes. Only the stillness before revelation. Then her voice, calm, unwavering, slices through the tension. What she said next didn't just silence the room. It earned the Chief Justice's respect. But to understand why that moment froze every soul in its seat, we need to rewind. The morning had begun like any other storm in Washington. Reporters lining the marble steps, flashes bursting against gray clouds, whispers rippling through the corridors. By the time Jasmine Crockett walked into the courtroom, the buzz had already reached fever pitch. Every outlet had a prediction, every pundit a headline waiting to be written. Some called it her biggest test yet. Others, with that familiar sneer, wondered aloud how long she'd last before cracking under pressure. Inside, the air carried that unmistakable tension of political theater. Men adjusted their ties, aides shuffled papers with performative urgency, and cameras swiveled like vultures circling for spectacle. But in the center of it all sat Crockett, unmoved. Her stillness wasn't passivity, it was power. Compressed into quiet. While others rehearsed sound bites, she studied the evidence. While others braced for applause, she braced for truth. The issue before the court wasn't small. It cut at the core of representation and the very right to challenge authority with dignity intact. For Crockett, it wasn't about politics. It was about principle. Every question hurled her way carried centuries of undertones. Who gets to speak? Who gets to be believed? Who earns respect in rooms built to doubt them? Outside, social media hummed with cynicism. She's too bold, too polished, too emotional. The same coded refrains that have followed every woman who dared to hold her ground. Yet none of it touched her. She'd faced worse on the streets, in hearings, in life. As the minutes crawled toward confrontation, even the press sensed something brewing. The usual script of outrage and optics was breaking. This wasn't a performance. It was poised under fire, a living rebuttal to every stereotype designed to silence her. And across the aisle sat one man who'd seen it all, but never this kind of composure. He had the kind of presence that filled a room before he even spoke. Booming voice, polished shoes, and a grin that never reached his eyes. Senator Clay Harwood had spent decades perfecting the art of controlled arrogance. Cameras adored him, not because of what he said, but because of how effortlessly he made every exchange feel like theater. He wasn't here to debate ideas. He was here to perform dominance. Harwood built his reputation on spectacle. Every hearing became a stage, every witness a prop for his practiced indignation. He spoke in sound bites, timed perfectly for primetime replay. Ask the questions here. He would bark, not to clarify, but to corner. His interruptions were calculated, his smirks choreographed. The more his opponents stumbled, the more his base applauded. Truth was secondary. Control was the show. There were stories, staffers whispering about how he rehearsed his outrage the night before major hearings, testing which lines landed best. He had a talent for turning subtle prejudice into polished rhetoric. When he challenged women in politics, it wasn't overt hostility. It was the polite skepticism that dripped with centuries of doubt. His questions always came wrapped in civility, but each word carried the weight of dismissal. The montage plays like memory, a young activist flustered as he cuts her off mid-sentence, a scientist's voice trembling while he mocked her data, a quiet nod to the camera after each interruption as if scoring points. To his followers, it was confidence. To everyone else, it was intimidation disguised as charm. And on this morning, Harwood believed he was walking into another predictable victory. Jasmine Crockett, young, composed, unapologetically confident, fit the archetype he'd learned to dismantle. He knew how to bait his opponents, provoke emotion, catch a reaction, label it unprofessional. The tactic had never failed him. He leaned back in his chair, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth, as if the scene were already written. But beneath his ease, there was something brittle, an insecurity so well hidden it masqueraded as conviction. For all his bluster, Harwood feared what he couldn't control, a woman who refused to play his game. He thought this would be another easy takedown, until the moment she spoke. Under the fluorescent lights, the courtroom became an arena. The hum of air conditioning mixed with the electric silence of expectation. Every exchange between them felt like flint striking steel, each question a spark searching for fuel. Harwood's tone oozed with practiced condescension. "Miss Crockett, let's stay focused," he said, every syllable sharpened to imply she wasn't. He leaned forward, the posture of a man confident in his upper hand. Crockett's silence unnerved him. It wasn't the silence of hesitation. It was calculation. He mistook it for weakness, but it was composure gathering weight. Narration weaves through the tension like a whisper. He'd studied how to make women stumble, but never how to face one who didn't flinch. Each question he threw bounced off the wall of her restraint. His voice grew louder, filling the room not with reason, but with the desperation of a man who realizes control is slipping. The reporters noticed at first the shift in energy, the subtle rebalancing of power. To the casual observer, it was just another exchange. But to those who'd seen Harwood's act before, something was different. The rhythm was off. The arrogance that once drew applause now sounded hollow. He wasn't leading the moment anymore. He was reacting to it. And as the gavel hovered between them, as the audience leaned forward sensing a crack in his performance, the focus drifted. No longer on his words, no longer on his authority, but on the quiet strength across the table. Because behind that composed expression, Crockett carried a lifetime of lessons that no one in that room understood yet. Long before her words carried weight in Washington, Jasmine Crockett learned how to fight for silence to be heard. Her story began in the rough edges of South Dallas, where the hum of traffic blended with the sound of persistence. Her parents worked long hours, their hands weathered but steady, teaching her that dignity wasn't something you inherited. It was something you protected. In school, she was the girl who raised her hand even when others laughed, the one who debated teachers not out of defiance but out of conviction. That spark, questioning, reasoning, never accepting, that's just how it is, became the compass guiding her through every locked door that followed. Law school wasn't glamorous. It was long nights under fluorescent lights, defending clients who couldn't afford anyone else. She took on cases no one wanted. The tenant fighting eviction, the protester facing charges, the single mother drowning in fines for daring to survive. Each victory felt small, each loss personal, but through it all, she learned the rhythm of battle, the pauses, the precision, the weight of words that could free or condemn. There were moments when she was dismissed before she even spoke. Too young, too passionate, too bold for the comfort of those who mistook calm for submission. But every dismissal became fuel. She didn't rise by imitation. She rose by endurance. Every courtroom that tried to shrink her only taught her how to stand taller. Narration threads softly through the memory. You can't rattle someone who's built from resilience. Her reputation grew not from theatrics, but from precision. She spoke like someone who had measured every syllable against justice itself. She listened more than she interrupted. When others lunged for spotlight, she aimed for substance. Her empathy wasn't softness, it was strategy. She understood that understanding her opponents was often the surest path to dismantling them. The leap from defense attorney to Congresswoman wasn't ambition, it was evolution. The same skills she honed in cramped courtrooms now echoed across national hearings. The same gaze that once steadied frightened clients now held seasoned politicians accountable. Every time she sat at a table of power, she carried with her the stories of those who'd never been invited inside. So when she entered that courtroom, surrounded by marble pillars and egos as old as the building itself, it wasn't intimidation she felt. It was recognition. This was another kind of trial, another room where truth needed an advocate unafraid to meet arrogance with composure. Every past experience, the sleepless nights, the quiet humiliations, the relentless preparation, led her here. Not by coincidence, but by design. Every moment had been rehearsal for this one. Every insult a brick in the foundation of her calm. So when the confrontation began, she didn't react. She recalibrated. The air in the chamber felt charged, as if every molecule waited for a spark. Senator Harwood straightened his tie and leaned into the microphone, his voice coated with practiced civility. "Ms. Crockett," he began, "I just want to be sure you actually understand the constitutional implications of what you're suggesting." The emphasis on actually landed like a challenge, and a few aides smirked behind their folders. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing the scent of confrontation that could turn into tomorrow's headline. Crockett didn't move. She folded her hands, eyes steady on him, her silence more eloquent than any rebuttal. Across the bench, Chief Justice Roberts watched closely, his expression unreadable, but his attention sharpened. Harwood mistook her calm for concession and pressed harder. "Because frankly," he continued, voice rising, "your interpretation sounds less like legal reasoning and more like political rhetoric." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Still, she didn't bite. She let the silence stretch just long enough to make his words echo awkwardly in the room. When she finally opened her mouth to respond, he cut in again, smiling, almost triumphant. No, let me finish," he insisted, gesturing broadly. Another interruption. Another chance for her to react. But she didn't. Every time he overstepped, every time his tone slipped from condescension to desperation, the balance of power shifted a fraction in her favor. The rhythm of his voice grew erratic. He could feel control slipping, but didn't know why. Her restraint exposed him more efficiently than any argument could. To the cameras, his confidence was starting to look like chaos. The aide stopped smirking. The reporters slowed their pens. Crockett leaned back, eyes unwavering, her composure almost defiant in its serenity. The silence after his last outburst felt heavier than his accusations. Even Roberts' gavel hovered uncertainly, waiting to see what she would do next. The moment teetered between collapse and revelation, every spectator holding their breath for the inevitable breaking point. And then, with the entire courtroom expecting her to break, she simply leaned forward and delivered the line that changed everything. "With all due respect, sir," she began, voice even, unhurried, slicing through the dense silence like a clean blade. "Truth doesn't tremble under pressure." The sentence landed like a gavel of its own. Quiet, decisive, impossible to ignore. The pen stopped mid-scribble. Cameras adjusted. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to dim, as if the room itself wanted to listen. Crockett's gaze never wavered. "You've suggested that my argument is political. But the Constitution you cite, the same one written to protect power from excess, demands more than sound bites. It demands integrity." Her tone wasn't offensive. It was declarative. Every word rested on evidence, not ego. "You accuse me of rhetoric. Yet the only performance here," she said, eyes briefly flicking to his restless hands, "is the one mistaking volume for virtue." Harwood shifted in his seat, mouth opening to cut her off, but she continued, steady and unstoppable. "You asked if I understand the law. I do. What I question," she said, her voice sharpening just enough to draw blood without breaking decorum, "is whether you remember why it was written." A collective inhale swept through the chamber. Robert's brow softened, the faintest trace of something, approval, maybe pride, flickering across his face. Crockett pressed on, building rhythm like a symphony cresting toward its peak. "For decades, Women like me were told to temper our tone, to shrink our arguments so the room would feel comfortable. But justice was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be consistent. Her voice deepened with conviction. So when you say I'm emotional, you're right. I am. Because every law we interpret here impacts real lives beyond this marble. And if that humanity sounds inconvenient, then perhaps the problem isn't my passion. It's your detachment. The words hung suspended, raw, poised, immovable. Harwood tried once more to reclaim the floor, his Ms. Crockett, barely audible over the weight of her presence. But the balance had shifted. The room no longer belonged to him. He was a man arguing against gravity. She took one final breath and delivered the closing strike. You can question my politics, my tone, even my patience. But don't mistake civility for surrender. Because composure, she said, eyes locking with his, isn't weakness. It's control. Silence. Then, a soft rustle, the quiet clap of restrained admiration from the gallery. Roberts didn't smile, not fully. But his nod was unmistakable. It was the kind of gesture that spoke louder than any verdict. Respect earned, not granted. And outside those walls, the world was already reacting to it began before she'd even left the courthouse. One clip, 37 seconds long, spread across every feed like wildfire. The caption was simple. She didn't flinch. Within hours, hashtag Crockett moment and hashtag Commas Power trended side by side, turning her poised rebuttal into a digital anthem. Morning hosts replayed the footage in slow motion, lingering on that crucial exchange, her stillness, his unraveling, and Robert's subtle, approving nod. Commentators called it the most composed takedown in modern hearings. One anchor said with awe, she didn't shout, she owned the silence. Across split screens, analysts debated what had truly happened. Some framed it as a masterclass in restraint, others as a rebuke to performative outrage. Editorials poured in from every corner. Composure is the new courage, read one. Crockett redefines power, declared another. For many viewers, it was personal. Young women saw themselves in her calm defiance. Immigrants, advocates, and everyday citizens felt a jolt of recognition. Someone had spoken with dignity in a room that so often rewarded noise. Clips of her line, "Truth doesn't tremble under pressure," became the day's most replayed soundbite, stitched into reels, remixed over swelling orchestral music. Politicians scrambled to comment. Some praised her discipline. Others warned against theatrics. But the people weren't debating, they were inspired. Messages flooded her office. Stories of teachers who'd shown the clip to their students, of mothers who said their daughters watched it twice just to memorize her composure. The nation, for a moment, seemed to breathe differently. In a time when shouting had become a substitute for conviction, her silence had spoken louder. And as the frenzy built, reporters gathered outside her office, waiting for a statement. But inside, Jasmine Crockett wasn't scrolling or celebrating. She was quiet, reflective, unmoved by the noise her calm had created. Because for her, the moment wasn't about applause, it was about restoring meaning to respect. The courthouse was quiet again. The cameras were gone. The marble floors gleamed under fading light. And somewhere down the hall, the echo of that gavel still lingered, faint, like the memory of a storm that had already passed. Jasmine Crockett sat alone for a moment, hands folded, breathing the stillness she'd fought to preserve. In the silence, her thoughts weren't of victory. They were of meaning, of how easily voices rise in anger, and how rarely they rise in truth. She remembered her grandmother's words, "Grace is power wrapped in patience." It was the kind of strength no opponent could interrupt, no insult could diminish. Her reflection in the courtroom glass wasn't that of a conqueror, but of someone who had simply refused to surrender her calm. Respect isn't demanded through noise. She thought softly. It's earned through grace. And perhaps that's why Chief Justice Roberts' subtle nod had struck so deeply. It wasn't political. It was human, an acknowledgement that dignity, when held firm, transcends the lines that divide. For a fleeting moment, respect itself felt bipartisan. Outside, pundits were still analyzing the exchange. Replaying the moment, she turned composure into courage. But inside those walls, something quieter had been restored. A sense that truth still has a place at the table, even when surrounded by arrogance. Her words would echo far beyond the courtroom, not because they were loud, but because they were lasting. They reminded a fractured audience that strength isn't found in domination, it's found in discipline. That leadership doesn't roar, it resonates. As the lights dimmed and the chamber fell into shadow, the air seemed to carry the faint echo of her voice. Calm, resolute, unwavering. It wasn't just a response. It was a reminder. Because every generation needs one. That calm isn't weakness. It's mastery in a world that rewards shouting. Jasmine Crockett proved that quiet conviction still commands the room. Her calm didn't just win an argument. It restored faith in what real leadership looks like. Because sometimes the strongest voice is the one that doesn't rise but stands firm. If you believe dignity speaks louder than arrogance, share this moment. Subscribe and stand with the movement that knows composure is power and truth doesn't need volume to be heard. Because when grace meets courage, the world doesn't just listen, it remembers.